this is Gina. Today I will be showing you how to make these Christmas wreath earrings. I've made just one so far. We'll make the other one during the video here. And basically, this is just a right angle weave, one needle method, just embellished a whole bunch. So, what we're going to do is start with, well, let me show you what we're going to use actually. I'm sorry, my washing machine is in the background and it makes a whole lot of noise. We are going to start with 50 3mm pearls. I'm using a butter colored cream glass pearl. Then we will need 34mm pearls, and that is my dog sneezing. It's going to be an interesting video. So we need 34mm pearls, 53mm pearls, and I'm using an olive green and a butter cream, and then we will need 54 round crystals, and this is a clear with an opal finish. We will also need an 11/0 seed bead. I'm using a check with the silver lining. You will need 2 ear wires. I'm using just a simple fish hook sterling silver ear wires. You will need about 1.5 yards to start with of 8-pound Fireline. You can use a 6-pound Fireline if you prefer. We will be going through these beads a lot. However, when I'm doing a one needle method right angle weave, I like a little bit heavier weight. It's just easier to keep my beads nice and tight and pretty. So thread about 1.5 yards onto your needle. I'm using a size 10 English beading needle, and we will begin with 3 3mm pearls and 1 4mm pearl on our needle. Bring it down to the end. Hold on to your beads and sew back through the very last or very first bead you added. Just sew back through all of them from the end up. And pull them into a circle like this, and then sew right back through them again. I'm going to sew all the way around. I'm on the side with my working thread, or with my tail I mean. So I'm going to sew through all the 3mm until I get to the other side where my tail is not exiting. This will make it nice and firm and tight, a good foundation to work on. So this is what you should have. Your tail is exiting here, your working thread here. We are going to work out of this bead here. As you can see, my thread is coming out towards the 4mm pearl. That is an indication to me that for my next unit that I'm going to share this pearl with, I will need a 4mm to start. If my thread was coming out on this side of the pearl, I would start with a 3mm. So I'm going to pick up a 4mm pearl and 2 3mm pearls. I'm going to share this pearl, so I only need 3 in my unit of 4, since that pearl will make my 4th bead. I'm going to go into this bead on the opposite side that the thread is coming out of and pull. I need to get back over to this pearl so that I can share it again in my next unit. So I'm going to pull this thread very tight and sew back through my 4mm pearl. Grab a hold of that a little better. If you can hold it between your forefinger and your thumb, of course I don't use my forefinger, but between your fingers and your thumb, and then sew through, you can keep your tension pretty well, and you need to keep good tension on this. So that's our second unit. Now we will share this purl again and add more beads to make our next unit. Our next unit, we are coming out of the 3mm purl on this side. It's not aiming towards the 4mm, it's aiming towards the 3mm. So that's an indication that we will pick up our next unit of beads starting with 3mm beads. So I will pick up 2 3mm beads and then a 4 on my needle. And I will come in to the side of the purl where my thread is not exiting, on the opposite side. Hold onto your beads and pull them tight. This is what you should have. Now we will sew back up through so that we can get to our working bead. Try to hold them and keep your tension. If you need to sew, if you find that you have a unit that's really loose, you can sew through it again. Just sew through it until you're exiting your the purl that we'll be working out of. So now we have 3 units and we are exiting this side of our working purl, and we are exiting towards our 4mm, so that's an indication to pick up a 4 first. Pick up a 4 and then 2 3s. Come back through our shared bead on the opposite side that the thread is coming out of and pull. I'm turning mine over. It's a little bit easier to sew back through my beads that way. And this is what you should have. It should start to curve in towards the 3mm beads a little bit. We will do this 9 times. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We have 9. This is going to be a 10 unit circle. We have to connect. We will have to connect our units into a circle now. Now we are coming out of this 3mm bead here towards the 4mm beads, on the side towards the 4mm bead. So we're going to pick up a 4mm bead. We're going to slide it down to our work. This bead, our 4mm bead we just added, and this bead will be the bottom of our set. So we're going to pick up this bead, go through the bead, get our tail out of the way, and pull. This will draw it together in a circle. However, we only have 3 beads together now. We need the 4th in our unit, and that will be another 3mm, because that's what's missing here. So we will drop this down so you can see where it goes, and we will be sewing through this bead, and this bead to make our unit. So we'll come through the top of this one, pull through, then we will need to sew through this one, pull tight. Then we will go through the entire unit again, just to make sure it's nice and secure and tight. At this point, I'm going to cut my tail off so it'll get out of my way. Okay, so this is what we have. Now I'm going to insert a 3mm or a 4mm crystal between each one of these beads. So I'm just going to pick up my work, pick up a 4mm on my beetle on my needle, and go through the next pearl in line. I'm going to pick up another. These opal ones are hard to see the holes. And just sew into the next 4mm pearl. Pull, you can feel them slide into place. They should kind of pop into place. It does make it tight to work through them later, but they need to pop into place securely. So give it a nice little tug. And my thread twisted. There we go. Just go all the way around the entire circle. Once you're done with that, this is what you should have. And we are going to sew down, we're going to sew through the next crystal and the next 4mm pearl. And like I said, it gets kind of tight. Find the hole in the crystal here. And then into the pearl. Now I'm going to, this is a unit, our original unit of right angle weave here. I'm going to sew down into my pearl following my original thread path. So I'll go down into the one that has the vertical hole in the first 3mm pearl in my thread path. And then I will sew in the very inner center of the 3mm pearl in that unit. And so now I am coming out of, let it focus here. It's not going to. Okay. I am coming out of this pearl. There's my thread. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up an 11/0, a 4mm crystal. I'm just going to stay zoomed in. You know what beads I'm using, so I'm not going to zoom out. So pick up an 11/0, a 4mm crystal, and an 11/0. Skip, you're coming out here, skip this bead and go into the very next one. Your beads will lie on top. Just kind of pull on it. I want to lay my work down, see if I can make it clearer for you to see. Okay. Now we're going to do the same thing all the way around. We're coming out here, we're going to pick up an 11/0, a crystal, an 11/0. We're going to skip this bead right next to the one our thread is coming out of and go into the next. And pull. And then pop those little seed beads down between the pearls if possible. Do the same thing again. Pick up an 11/0, a crystal, an 11/0. Okay, so skip this one and go into the next one. And your bead will flip on top of the 3mm row of beads. Pick up an 11/0, a crystal, an 11/0, and so skip one, sew into the next one, and again pick up an 11/0, crystal, an 11/0, and sew, skip one, sew into the next one. Now on this last one here, whoops, let's get closer. On this last one, we're not only going to sew into the pearl, sew into that first. We are now going to sew up into the 11-0 on the first we added, the very first one we added, the crystal and the 11-0 on the other side. If you can do it in one stroke here, and apparently not. So after you add your last crystal, you will go through the 11-0, the crystal, and the 11-0. And now we will add a 3mm pearl in between each of the crystals we just added. However, you will pick up the 11-0 on either side as you do this. So now we're coming out of the 11-0 on the other side of the first crystal we added. We will now pick up a 3mm pearl, and we will go into the 11-0 and the crystal on the next bead here. And pull through. And again, pull tight. Now we will go through this little 11-0, pick up a 3mm pearl, and go through the next 11-0 and crystal. Try to pull tight and straighten everything. You don't want these little 3mm pearls to be thready or loose. So through the 11-0, pick up a 3mm pearl, sew through the next 11-0 and crystal. If you can get all of them, the 11-0 on the other side too, go ahead and do that. Now I'm already coming out of my 11-0, so I will pick up a pearl, go through the next crystal, 11-0 and crystal, and the 11-0 on the other side if I can muster it here, and I cannot, so I will pick up the 11-0 now. And grab a little 3mm, and this is my last one, which gets a little tough to get through the last 11-0. Just kind of force your way in there. Okay, so this is what you should have. Okay, so we are coming out of this crystal right here. Now we need to sew through this 11-0 and the very first pearl we added in this row. So we'll go through the 11-0 and then through this 3mm pearl, just like that. And that's where we're at. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add a row of 4mm on top of the row we just added here, but it's going to lay over, and you'll see what I mean. We'll pick up, we're just coming out of the 3mm pearl. We want to ignore that little seed bead next to it. We'll pick up 2 seed beads and a 4mm and 2 seed beads. And now we're going to sew right into the very next 3mm pearl that we did on the row we just added. So we're going to go right into this 3mm pearl and pull. And you have like a little flap. Okay. Now, again, we're going to pick up, I'm just going to leave it zoomed for a moment. We're going to pick up 2 11-0s, a 4mm, and 2 11-0s. And we are again going to sew into the very next, we're coming out of this pearl, we're going to sew into the very next 3mm pearl, ignoring the 11-0s next to them. And pull tight. And again, pick up 2 11-0s, a 4mm, and 2 11-0s, and sew into the very next 3mm pearl and pull. And again, we will pick up 2 11-0s, a 4mm pearl, and 2 11-0s, and sew into the very next 3mm pearl. Pull tight. One more time. We'll pick up 2 11-0s, a 4mm pearl, and 2 11-0s, and sew into the next pearl. And now we have these little guys, they're just kind of laying loose on top, and make sure they're tight, no extra thread showing through. We will need to anchor this guy down to this little other 4mm pearl. Where they match up is where we will anchor them together. So what we need to do is we need to get to this 4mm pearl so that we can start anchoring it. So I'm going to sew up through these 2 little seed beads here. I'm exiting this pearl. I'll sew up through these 2 little seed beads, and I will come through this pearl here. Okay. Sew up through these 2, and then through this 4mm pearl. Oh goodness. Okay. So now I am exiting this 4mm pearl. I want to anchor it to this pearl down here. But what I'm actually going to do is just slide between the pearl and the crystal. I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to pick up 2 11-0 seed beads. I'm going to come down through the next crystal. So I'll be between the bead that matches the bead on top and the crystal. And pull. Now, I need to anchor this one. So I will sew all the way through this pearl here, the crystal here, and then into the matching 4mm. And you want to be on the far side. Okay, so pick up 2 11-0s, come through your 4mm pearl on top, pull, pick up 2 more 11-0s, and then you will sew down into the 4mm, the green one, the 4mm pearl, so that you will be between the crystal and the 4mm pearl, and pull. So this is what you have. Let's get as close as we can without it blurring here. So what we are doing in essence is these little ones that we've just added on top, we are anchoring to the bottom 4mm pearls. And when we sew, we'll sew through the far side, add our two little 2mm, our two little 11-ohs, go up through the 4mm, add two more 11-ohs, go down through the 4mm, and then we'll sew through the crystal and the pearl next to it and get all the way over to where we're between the crystal and the pearl. On the next one we need to anchor. So sometimes it's hard to get through both the crystal and the pearl at the same time. If you can, do it. If you can't, just go through each one individually. Alright, so now I am positioned right where my next bead on top needs to be anchored to my bead on bottom. So I will pick up two 11-ohs, sew through the 4mm on top, and pull. Now I'm on the other side here, so I'm going to pick up two 11-ohs and I'm going to sew through the crystal. This way I can keep working my way around. If I were to just anchor it to just the 4mm together, it would be difficult. I wouldn't be in position to move to the next one I need to anchor. So I will sew through the crystal instead of the 4mm. And then I will move through the 4mm and the crystal next to it until I get to the point to where I can anchor my next 4mm lying on top. So now I'm right below the 4mm that needs to be anchored. Pick up two 11-ohs and just go through the 4mm, pearl, and pull. Now here's where you can get some thread issues, so make sure you pull it pretty tight. Now I need to anchor this side, so I'll pick up two 11-ohs, go through the crystal on the bottom, and pull. Now we need to get over to this pearl, so we're going to sew through this pearl and this crystal. So I'm not going to get both of them, so I'm just going to go through the pearl. Now I'm right below the bead that needs to be anchored, so I will pick up two 11-ohs, sew up through the 4mm that needs anchoring, and pull. Now I'm on the other side, so I am going to pick up two 11-ohs and sew through the next crystal. Okay, and then pull it through. Slip knot in my thread here. There we go. Now we need to sew through the 4mm pearl, and the crystal, pick up two seed beads. We're back to the first one we started. We already did half of the anchoring here, so now we will just go through the top of the 4mm. Now we're going to add two little crystals in between in the gap that we have created here. So we are, let's see if I can get just a little closer. We are coming out of this 4mm pearl. There's two 11-ohs right here. We're going to sew through these two 11-ohs and work our way up to the 3mm pearl, and then we're going to slide through it, and just it, not the 11 O's on the other side. we are now going to add a crystal. We're going to pick up a crystal, and then we're going to pick up 2 11-0s. And we are going to sew down between this 4mm and this crystal. And pull. Now we've added our first little crystal embellishment on the top between the 4mm anchors that we made. And we've sewn down through between the 4mm and the 4mm crystal and through the crystal. Now we're going to sew through the pearl and the next crystal, get past our anchor that we've made. We're coming out here. So here's the anchor. Now we're going to come up into the little 3mm on the top here. So we're going to pick up, we want a little bit of anchor here, so we're going to pick up 2 11-0s. We're going to pick up a crystal, and then we are going to sew up through this 3mm pearl. And pull through. And that will embed that crystal right underneath the 3mm pearl. Now we want another one right there to fill in the little spaces that we have between anchors. So we are going to pick up the crystal first now, and then 2 11-0s. Drop them down. And we will now sew between the 11-0 and the crystal here. So we just added this one. We will now go on the other side of the 11-0 or of the 4mm pearl and go through the crystal right here and pull. So what we have in essence done is just added 2 crystals underneath the 3mm pearl, and we've connected them to the 4mm pearl on the bottom with 11-0s. And that's what we've done. Now we're going to move over. We have another gap here where our 3mm is alone, and you can see the little 4mm there. We need to get to this space. So we are going to sew between the beads, the 4mm and the crystal. Come up through. They're getting pretty tight now, so just kind of manipulate your way through. The best you can. Just take your time. You'll get through them. They're just a little stubborn at this point. Now, we are between the crystal and the 4mm, directly beneath the 3mm pearl that we want to attach to. So we're going to pick up 2 11-0s and a 4mm crystal, and now we're going to go up through the 3mm on top and pull. And this is what you have. Now we need to add one right next to it and anchor it down in here. So we will pick up the crystal first and 2 11-0s, and then we will go down in between this bead and this bead, go through the crystal and pull. Pull them tight. If you don't get them tight, they'll be pretty thready. You'll be able to see your thread through the top. Now we need to work all the way over in between each one here. So we are going to again sew through the 4mm purl and the next crystal. Oops, sorry you couldn't see me there. There we go. Now we need to anchor these together, 2 11-ohs. And a crystal up through the 3mm. Pick up a crystal and 2 11-ohs. And then down between the 4mm and the crystal, right here. Pull through and pull tight. And we have one more open section here where we'll add 2. And then we'll have our very last one. So go ahead and do that, and I'll meet you back here. Okay, so now I'm to the point where I have finished all of them except for the very first section where we started. So I have finished my last one. I need to sew through my 4mm purl and my crystal. I'm coming up between the 4mm and the crystal right beneath the 3mm purl that we started with. Here's the crystal, the very first crystal we put on. So now I need to pick up 2 11-ohs and a crystal and then sew up through this 3mm purl, the very first one we started, and pull tight. And this is what you should have. Now we need to add our ear wire. So we are going to sew through these little 11-ohs. We're coming out of this purl right here. We need to sew up through these little 11-ohs right here. We want to get over here between, well, actually any 2 crystals, the 2 crystals that come together that we just added, we want to get between those. So let's target this one right here since it's closer. So we've sewn up through these 2 little 11-ohs. We're going to sew up through this crystal now. And if you look on top here, you've got your 2 crystals coming together below the 3mm purl, and you've got your little 11-oh seed beads. We are going to go through the crystal and then through just one of the 11-oh seed beads and pull through. So we are coming out, see if I can get a really good shot here. We are coming out between the 2 11-ohs on top of the 4mm purl between the crystals that we added in our last step. Now we're going to pick up 3 11-ohs they're arguing with me, 3 11-ohs and a crystal and then an 11-oh. I'm going to scoot back so you can see what I'm doing. So I have on my needle 3 11-ohs, a crystal, an 11-oh, and then I'm going to pick up my ear wire. Make sure your ear wires are closed. You know how they can open up at the very top. Make sure they're closed tight. because your thread can slip through. So pick up 3 11/0s, a crystal, 11/0 an ear wire, and then an 11/0, a crystal, and 3 11/0s. So this is what you will have for your, let me do that again. Yep, and then 3 11/0s. And this is what you will have for your anchor. So you will have 3 11/0s, a crystal, an 11/0, a wire, an 11/0, a crystal, and 3 11/0s. Now, zoom back in here. We're going to come back down through the next, on the other side, between the 11/0s on top here. So right between those two, we're going to come through them. And we're going to pull all of this into place until it looks like that. So this is what you will have. Okay? Now, we're going to go down through this crystal. We're coming out of this 11/0 in the front. We're going to go down through the crystal, right beneath your anchor here, or right beneath your 11/0s you added for your clasp. Then we're going to go into the little 3mm pearl in front. Try not to get to the 11/0s. Let's go through this little guy here, the 3mm pearl, and then back up through crystal, go through the 11/0 in front here, right here, and then back up through all of the beads that you just added for your ear wire. Go through all of them. So through the 11/0s, pull tight, back down through this side. Now you can do this a couple of times if you'd like. Just sew back down through the crystal, so through the 3mm pearl in front here, back up through the crystal and back around several times if you'd like. I'm just going to tie off simply because of the fact that time is getting a little long on my video. So I'm going to go back through my 3mm pearl. I'm going to pull everything very secure and snug, and then I'm going to sew back up through this crystal. I'm going to sew through this crystal back here. And I'm just going to tie off between the crystal and the pearl here. Just pull, make a half hitch knot, pull tight. Now I've got a little thread here. And that's what you should have. A little tiny loose thread there. I'm not really sure how I did that. Make sure you pull really tight so that you don't get any threads, because this can get kind of thready if you're not careful. And that's what you should have. Let's zoom out just a little bit. And that's what your earring should look like. Now I'm just going to cut off my working thread and tuck it in between the beads here. And I now have a set of wreath earrings. Now I know this looks very difficult, simply because it's tough getting between the beads, but it's really very basic. It's just a lot of embellishment. You may need to refer back to the video several times. If that doesn't work for you, you can always leave me a message or a comment, and I will try to help you and walk you through it. My next video, I'm going to make a bunch of these little elements and connect them together as a necklace. So you'll have matching earrings and a necklace. These are actually very cute. They are a little bit more advanced, but don't let this discourage you. Don't be worried about trying it. Go ahead and try it and see what you come up with. The only thing you can never waste is thread. Have a good day. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.